as we pick up here, Matthew chapter 16, and we see where Jesus is going, what Jesus has been doing, it starts, I'm on the wrong page. It starts right here where it says in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 1, the Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. All right. That's all we're going to read in Matthew today. So if you want to flip over to the book of Jonah, because here's the thing about the sign of Jonah. When we think about Jonah in the 21st century in the church, certainly not even the church, even in our culture, right? Jonah is such a famous story that it's kind of one of those stories that has made it into the culture, right? It's up there with stories like, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, or maybe to a lesser degree, Scorpion and the Frog. I was asking Rebecca last night whether or not the Scorpion and the Frog is still well told. I think some people call it the Scorpion and the Fox. It depends on where you've heard it told, but it's one of those things where we have all these stories, we have all these tales that we tell people, and they're meant to hold a greater lesson for us to understand. And when Jesus is sitting there and he's talking to the Sadducees and Pharisees, and remember, these are two groups that have already began plotting against Jesus, right? They heard that there's a big crowd and a lot of ruckus being raised about what Jesus had to say, and so it drew their interest, and they came and they watched, but they didn't like him. And it says they're already plotting against him. And so now, remember, he just finished feeding another 4,000 people, and it says they came up before him and they want to test him. They want to test him because they don't actually believe he is who he says he is. And here's the thing: can you imagine? It's one of those things where people say, well, why shouldn't they want to test him, right? You would want to make sure that he really is God, wouldn't you? He really is Messiah. But let's remember, let's keep this. Let's understand the context in which this is happening. They're coming up and testing him again after all of the miracles, after all the healings, after all the restorations, after driving demons out, after doing all these amazing things. They still come up and they're like, yeah, but that wasn't good enough, Jesus. Give us a sign from heaven if you're really God. By the way, who remembers what happened the day that Jesus got baptized? Right? They got their sign from heaven, didn't they? The clouds parted, the dove came down, and the voice of God said, "This is my son, with whom I am pleased." Right? The signs have been there. The witnesses are apparent. The witnesses are still around and talking to people, sharing what they saw. The witnesses are going around and sharing the ministry of Jesus, all the amazing things that he's been doing, the people that he's healed, the demons he's drove out. It's amazing. Things are going on. And so the reason I say all this is because this test that the Sadducees and Pharisees are doing, right? This isn't because they have doubt in their hearts and they're trying to find faith. They're trying to find a reason to kill him. Right? And so I don't want us to think of this as a test in the way that often you and I maybe would ask God for a sign. Right? We ask God for a sign because we're like, oh God, I just really need a reason to understand that this is the right way to go. And you know what's amazing is more often than not, God actually does help us along. Right? There's of course that story about the man who was being rescued from a flood. Have you guys ever heard this story? So there's a big flood in the town, and the man said, "Don't worry, I'm going to pray to God." And he prayed to God, and the truck came up, and they said, "Hey, come with us. We need to get out of town." He said, "No, I'm waiting for God." And the flood waters rise, and he's sitting on, he's up in the second level, and a boat comes by, and it says, "Come on, we'll rescue." And he says, "No, I'm waiting for God." And flood still rises. A helicopter comes by, and he says, "Come on, we'll rescue." And he's like, "Well, no, I'm waiting for God." And the flood waters rise again, and he drowns. And he gets to heaven. He said, "God, where were you?" he said, what do you mean? I sent a truck, a boat, and a helicopter. What more do you want? Just because God doesn't help you in the way that you want. And that's exactly what's happening with the Pharisees and the Sadducees here. Right? They want a warrior. They want a liberator. They want someone who's going to come and overthrow Rome and set up the kingdom of heaven in the way they've imagined it. And instead, what does Jesus say? I give you the sign of Jonah. Now, we think of Jonah and the fish. And we go, what is he getting at? But the crazy thing about Jonah, the story of Jonah, is this. Number one, it's often one of the more controversial ones in that people will say, oh, you really believe that Jonah is true? Here's the thing. Do any of you believe that the boy who cried wolf is true? Okay, no hands, so I'm going to assume it means no one thinks it's true. Does that mean that the point isn't there? That the moral of the story doesn't matter? Because it's not true, because the boy who cried wolf wasn't true, does that mean the moral of the story is wrong? No, absolutely not. Right? It is absolutely correct. Here's why I say this. I don't actually know if I'm given that much reason to believe that Jonah is 100% true, but what I do know is this, that the moral of the story, what Jesus and God the Father is trying to help me to understand is this. There's a point to what is happening to Jonah. Right? We don't have all the details, and I definitely believe God could do it. But the point is, it doesn't even matter whether it was real or not real. The point is, what is Jesus saying when he says the sign of Jonah? What was the point of Jonah? So we're going to look at the book of Jonah, and I've picked out a few sections here, and we're going to just talk about the book of Jonah, because I want us to understand it the very same way that the Pharisees and the Sadducees understood it. Right? Because the Pharisees and Sadducees were very, very well read. They knew the Torah and the prophets. They knew the scriptures very, very well. And so when Jesus says, I give you the sign of Jonah, and then walks away, they knew exactly what he meant. So what is the point of the book of Jonah? And so Jonah chapter 1 and verse 1, it starts here. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, and where he found a ship bound for that port. And after paying a fare, he went aboard and he sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, here's the thing about the book of Jonah. I've heard it said many different ways, but why does God call Jonah to go to Nineveh? It's because they've had great sin, and he wants to give them a warning. So he calls Jonah, and he says to Jonah, Jonah, I want you to be my messenger. I want you to be my prophet. I want you to speak for me. And Jonah, I want you to go and let them know, if they don't straighten up, I'm going to have to act. And then what does Jonah do? Does Jonah say, oh, you know what? That's too scary. The Ninevites would come against me. They would try to kill me. I don't want to do this, Lord. This is too scary for me. I couldn't possibly do this. See, here's the thing. I've often heard it said that way, but that's not what the word says. The word doesn't say he fled from Nineveh. He was afraid of the Ninevites, that he was afraid of what those people would do. And remember, at the time, in the ancient world, there are three great powers in the world. There are the Egyptians, which everyone knows about because they're kind of still hanging around, and their pyramids still hang out to this day. There's the Hittites, the people from the Anatolia Peninsula, which is modern-day Turkey, and they kind of ruled that mountain range. And then there's the Sumerians, the people in the east, the people that is now modern-day Iraq and Iran. They would later become Babylonian and eventually the Persians. But and here's the other thing, is that we often try and fit our current model of the world, where we have nation states back on the ancient world. That's not how things ran back then. It was all city-states, and you all kind of worked around a city, and your city was your hub, and that's kind of where you belong to. And so Jonah would have been very, very well aware of Nineveh. Nineveh was one of the most prosperous cities in all of the Sumerian region. Nineveh was incredibly powerful, and in fact, one of the funnier stories that I discovered when I was doing some research about Babylon and Nineveh and and all these places over in that region is they did a lot of international commerce, we would call it today. And there's actually a letter that has been recovered. It was on a clay tablet. It was sent by messenger to Egypt where he was returning a pair of shoes. The king of the city was returning a pair. Even back then, we had people returning stuff that they didn't like. Right? 3,000 years ago, people were still bringing stuff. I always think that's so funny. Even for some reason, of all the records to survive that time, we have this return receipt of someone saying, hey, I need to send my shoes back. I don't like them. So strange. But needless to say, the point is that they were all very well acquainted with each other. Everyone knew what Nineveh was. Everyone knew what Egypt was. These were well known to the people. And so for Jonah does not want to go. It says he flees from the Lord, not from Nineveh. He was afraid of what God had asked him to do. And we're not quite given a reason why right off the beginning. But it's going to become apparent to us as we continue on. Now, I forgot to write this down, but at the end of chapter 1 and into chapter 2, we, of course, have God sends the storm onto the sea. The sailors are freaking out. They don't know what's going on. They cast lots. They realize that it was Jonah who brought this ill fortune on them. And they say, Jonah, what have you done? What have you done to cause this terrible storm to come upon us? And he says, yes, I have acted against the Lord. Throw me into the sea. Right? Not, God, I'm sorry, please stop the storm. I'll go and do what you want. I would rather die than go to the city of Nineveh. I would rather end my life than give them the warning that you asked me to give to them. This is how serious Jonah is about this, to the point where the men literally grab hold of him, they throw him into the sea, a big fish comes up, swallows up Jonah, and then the sea becomes calm, and presumably the sailors make it out of there. 3 days he's held in the belly of a fish. Now again, does it matter if he's in the belly of the fish? No, it doesn't. The point is this. In that darkness, in that waiting, in that hell, he finally realizes in chapter 2 and verse 7, when he's praying to God, chapter 2, verse 7, when my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord. And my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple, to those who cling to worthless idols. Turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say salvation comes from the Lord. He finally has a change of heart. You know what? God, you could have killed me. You could have let me die. You know what, God? I recognize who you are. And we know, of course, from the story, the fish then vomits him up. He's on the shore. And then in chapter 3, verse 1, it says, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh. Proclaim to it the message I give you. So Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord. He went to Nineveh. And now Nineveh was a very large city. It took him 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. Now, what does that mean? So he goes in and he tells them, in 40 days it's all over, right? This is the message that God gave him. In 40 days I'm going to destroy Nineveh. Why? Because of their wickedness, because of their chasing idols, because of their going after false gods. You have done so much evil, Nineveh, I cannot bear the sight of you any longer. In 40 days I will destroy you, right? Same as what he did with Sodom and Gomorrah. And now we get to the point where we wonder, what was God's purpose here? What was going on? Why was Jonah so afraid to preach this message? Because we know what God ends up doing. God relents. He watches their repentance. They put on sackcloth. What does that mean? They humble themselves. They recognize it's not all the pomp and frills. Remember, Nineveh is an incredibly rich place. The people there have the very best. Things are good in Nineveh. Life is good in Nineveh. And what they realize is, we've been doing it all wrong. It says everyone from the richest, that means the king of the city, down to the poorest, threw on sackcloth and said, we were wrong. And they humble themselves and they beg for forgiveness. By the way, this is good news for each and every one of us. It's a reminder to each and every one of us that there is none of us that are too far gone. No matter what you've done, no matter what you've been through, God will bring salvation. He loves you that much. The problem is, that's the problem Jonah had with it. See, Jonah was much like the older brother in the story of the prodigal son. And we read about this, it says, because we know that Jonah, God's anger was relenting, and it says in chapter 4, verse 1, but to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. And he prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord? When I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God that relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. But the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? Jonah had gone out, sat down in a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter. He sat down in its shade and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant. He made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head, to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at the dawn the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so he grew faint. He wanted to die, and he said, it would be better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? He said, it is, he said. And I am so angry, I wish I were dead. But the Lord said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend to it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and it died overnight. And should I not have concern over the great city of Nineveh, and where there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right from their left, and also many animals? By the way, if you didn't know, that was all of chapter 4. Jonah is a very short book. I remember I read this when I was young. Probably the first time I read it, it was probably about Seth's age. I didn't really understand the story until I got older. I didn't understand what God was getting at. I was like, well, yeah, why can't he be upset about the plant? What's going on here? Like, I think it's ridiculous that he doesn't want to save these people, but what's going on? I think God makes it very clear in the book of Job as well, when he makes it very clear to Job at the end. Who are you, Job, that you think you have any say? Where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? Where were you when I brought the stars into the sky? Where were you when I breathed out all of creation? And you're trying to tell me what to do? Right? It wasn't Jonah that nurtured the plant. It wasn't Jonah that made the plant grow and come and provide comfort to Jonah. Jonah had nothing to do with that. It was God from beginning to end. And it was God's to do with what he would please. Now, how much more does he care about the people of Nineveh, the people who they're yes, they're misguided, yes, they're mixed up, and it says they don't even know their left from their right. How on earth are they able to make good decisions if they can't understand these simple little things? They are like children in need of guidance. But unfortunately for Jonah, and this is where the sign of Jonah comes in, what does Jonah think? I did right. I lived your way. I did the things that you asked me to do. Me, God. Look what I have done. Right? Much like the brother, right? The older brother in the parable of the prodigal son. I did the right thing. I came by and I made the sacrifices and I did what you asked me to do. And I did all of this. God, why on earth would you show them mercy when I've worked so hard? Because it's His. That's like it's one of those answers as a parent, right? Kids, you guys, you know this, right? Have your parents ever done this? Because I said so. Have they ever said that to you? No? I can guarantee all of the adults in this room definitely heard it from our parents when we were growing up, right? You heard that, didn't you? Because I said so. This is essentially what God's saying. He's like, who are you? Who are you to question me, question my mercy, question my salvation that I provide to all who are willing, that I provided to you as well, Jonah? How on earth is it that you have no compassion for your fellow man? Why is it that you are only concerned about what you do? And I think this is what Jesus was trying to draw us back to. It has never, ever been about earning your way into God's good graces. It has never been about salvation through the works that we do here on this earth. It has always been about God's compassion. It is always about Him relenting against the thing that we deserve because He loves us. Can you imagine how wild that would be? In a court case where, you have someone convicted of a heinous murder, premeditated, they plotted out every single detail. And they come to the end, they say, you are absolutely guilty. The gavel comes down, they go to sentencing, and they say, it has been paid. How grateful do you think that person would be to the person who paid their debt? And this is what God is trying to show Jonah. And this is what Jesus is trying to show them. You guys are caught up in all of the wrong stuff. You're too worried, Pharisees and Sadducees, about the things that you've done with your own hands, your own actions, your own piousness, your own salvation that you've earned, instead of recognizing that it has always been a gift. It has always been by the goodness of God that we can find ourselves saved. I love this because Jesus doesn't sit there and argue. Jesus doesn't sit there and debate. He says, guys, I give you the sign, a story you know well, the story of Jonah, the man who got too caught up in his own bitterness and anger that he couldn't let go. By the way, this is one of those things, and people always say this, like, I'm not one of those people, by the way, who says forgive and forget, okay? I get that. But I do believe absolutely in forgiveness. Why? Because if you don't forgive, it doesn't injure the other party in any way. It doesn't hinder them or their life. All it is a poison to yourself. Imagine for a moment, who here has ever had like a bad laceration? Bad cut. Now, before you say anything, Rebecca, because I know that you're going to want to make a comment here, imagine if all you ever did was pick at that cut over and over and over again. Yeah, I see you laughing. Imagine you just sit there and pick. What happens to that cut? Yeah, it gets worse, right? You're opening yourself up to infection. You're allowing it, and you're only making it worse for yourself. And here's the thing. What is forgiveness like? It's like you getting that wound and just allowing it to heal. Here's the thing. What happens if you allow it to heal 6 months from now? You get a bad laceration. What ends up happening? You're left with a scar, right? You're left with a reminder, but it's no longer consuming you. You remember, yeah, you know what? When I went down this path before, I did get stung. I won't let it happen again, but I'm not going to hold on to it anymore. See, the trouble is, with these Pharisees is they're not willing to let go. They're wanting so desperately to find to provide their own way into heaven, to live the only way they know how, that they're not willing to hear Jesus. They're not willing to learn the lesson from Jonah. They're not willing to understand whether or not Jesus may have a point. Instead, they're going to hold on to that bitterness they have against the Romans. They're going to hold on to that bitterness that has been generated over generations against the Greeks that are around them. Instead of realizing that they too are the children of God, that God loves them very much, and they need to know that there is a better way. There is a way out, and there is a way to forgiveness. Here's the thing. He may have given the sign of Jonah to the Pharisees and Sadducees, but it is there for us here as well today. Let us not make that mistake. Let us not make the mistake of holding on to that bitterness, much like Jonah did, and instead choose a path of forgiveness and mercy, to allow God's compassion to pour out on whomever he would have. Because honestly, that is the greatest gift that each and every one of us has been given. And so instead of being like Jonah, instead of being angry and wishing death upon ourselves rather than forgiveness for others, let us instead choose what Jesus had to offer. Recognize that Jesus was giving a warning. And let us heed that and choose a path of grace and forgiveness today.